Welcome back, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. We're back again. This is part 13 of The Wisdom of the Fourth Way by Rebecca and Theodore Nottingham. This is Teachings of Inner Transformation, Identification, being able to see it. Identification is one of the most difficult psychological aspects to observe. When you are identified, observing eye isn't present. It takes more effort to observe identification than to observe the results of identification. Negative eyes, complaints, inner considering, etc. Identification is not an attention issue. It is the wrong work of the emotional center. A person attempting to awaken by way of the work will be able to have some small part of their mind see identification happening in themselves. These eyes that can see identification are not themselves identified. Consequently, the force of identification is lessened by the eyes that can see it and refuse to give their energy to it. This is a powerful incentive to practice self-observation and inner separation. The accumulated eyes of observation and clarification and understanding eventually have enough force to stop automatic emotions and reactions. The aim here being to consciously choose right action. Identification is especially hard to work on because we get our sense of who we are by way of identifying, i.e., what you care about, what you love, hate, need and want, etc. It fills you with energy and a sense of meaning when it is really only stealing your life and your force. Since we feel like we are defined by what moves us the most, I'm a Republican, a victim, a freedom fighter, a feminist, a devout person, it is very difficult to see a level of relativity that denies one's sense of self and purpose. This is the stripping of the ego. It is painful and hard to let go of long-held convictions or identifications, to see with relativity that your attitudes, opinions, presumptions and passions have all been acquired throughout your life. Therefore, they are subjective. They are changeable. They contain not the whole truth of a thing, only that which satisfies false personality. They are not you. Only inner separation, another difficult practice, can work at first against identification. Eventually, when the emotional center has been cleansed of the self-interest that builds identifications, action from a higher, more objective level is possible. You will be able to choose consciously what to give your energy to and how, but this is very far down the road. Be patient while working. Results usually take a long time in coming, but growth is every step of the way. Observe identification. See the strength of grip that it has on you. See the same grip it has on others. See how it fills you with energy, how you get a little thrill from the jolt of it. See how it is full of justification. See that the agenda that fires your identification is self-serving, and so is the next person's, and the next. This is where to make personality passive. The why is so that you can see through the false personality and all of its obstructions to a higher level of scale and relativity, which can free you from identification. Exercises to work on identification. Self-observation, register identification. Try to observe where it originates in you. Try to see its motivation. Practice inner separation. Practice the stop exercise. Make personality passive. Give no attention to justifying eyes. Remember scale and relativity. Remember objective truth. And remember yourself. The burst of energy that you experienced ought to be a positive experience, sometimes accompanied by a flash of higher consciousness. This energy is liberated from the identification that would have consumed it. If there is not identification, that energy is available for something else. The idea of doing exercises to help build an observer and like what it didn't like is only half right. One builds an observer through self-observation. Trying to like what it doesn't like is wrong work of the emotional center. The idea of trying to like what the machine doesn't like is more about separation and non-identification than it is about forcing yourself to endure something that is distasteful. It is also unnecessary and will inhibit real self-observation, which must stay objective in order to work properly. Wrong work of the emotional center results in wasted energy. Can you afford it? And is an obstruction to higher emotion and will foul up the workings of the other centers with hurry and identification, etc. Identification is the wrong work of the emotional center. It feels real because it is. You have given it reality by consenting to it. It also has a more intense energy than non-identification, which helps to make it feel more real. Identification helps create opinions, attitudes, and convictions, likes and dislikes, which consequently make you think that it is who you are. It is not. These attributes are acquired. They belong to a false personality. You are the real I of your higher conscious self, the authentic self you are seeking to manifest. Sometimes just seeing repeatedly the same manifestations of the wrong work of false personality diminishes their strength. After all, the eyes of self-observation are not identified with what is being observed. As they accumulate, they draw force from identification, weakening its hold on you, eventually giving you enough will to disengage from wrong work. I cannot think of any wrong work from the other centers, intellectual, moving, instinctive, that isn't the product of the emotional center's wrong work acting through the other centers. For instance, an avid reader who lives her life with her face in a book is definitely misusing the intellectual center. The emotional center is investing the intellectual center with energy that is out of place in that center. It creates fervor. It creates identification. It creates an imbalance in the activity of the centers. The wrong work of the moving center is almost always hurry. People who can't stop rushing and can't stop doing things, who can't sit still. This is caused by the emotional center acting inappropriately in the moving center, creating identification and agitation. Instinctive center, wrong work, involves obsessive behavior of an instinctive nature, i.e. eating, sex, sleeping, etc. Indeed, vanity can attach itself to anything. But the issue here has to do with the work idea that thoughts come into you from all different sources. Some you can recognize and some you can't. But any thought, aren't I something is just a passing I. You can credit it or not. You can identify with it or not, or you can ignore it. Ask yourself if this is a real feeling that you have. Probably not, but if it is, and you persevere in the work, you'll lose that one fast. Take the issues as they come up. When you notice that you are identifying, again, stop. If, for instance, you hate the drive to work, the traffic, waiting at the lights, other drivers' behavior and negativity, the loss of productive time, you are driving, a moving centered activity with your emotional center. Disengage your emotions from moving centered activity. If you notice that what you are identifying with is a future event, then you are almost certainly in imagination. Of course, directed, creative, intentional imagination, how to work out a problem or create a particular outcome, is valuable, intellectually centered work. But you will probably find that your negative imagining is full of speculation and the negative discourse that accompanies it. This is emotional center's wrong work again, distorting the intellectual center's proper activity. If you have work concerns, you can deal with them without identifying. Let your emotional center inform you, not steamroll you. Question. I observed a moment that would usually lead to identification and imagination about the future. I noticed that a want internally arrived as a response to an internal emptiness. This want, should I have gone with it, would have fed me or filled me up in some way, and conversely, should I be able to stay with the state of hunger or emptiness and not immediately react, I might avoid identification. Can you comment on this? Response. This experience of not going with an automatic I is crucial. What it might have fed you would have been a waste. If you can avoid identification, that would be the kind of emptiness that is serene and receptive. If the emptiness and hunger you experience are negative emotions, identify them as such and do not touch them psychologically. Question. Uspensky said that identification was the other side of the coin of self-remembering. Is this a useful characterization? Is identification wrong work of only the emotional center or all emotional parts? Response. Identification is the wrong work of the emotional center in any part. Identification has more feeling in it than ordinary emotions. People live by going from identification to identification. They define themselves by what they identify with. Identification is emotional wrong work occurring in any center. Being identified is automatic behavior. There is no consciousness in it. It is subjective, and what is important to you at this time in your life can change in a New York minute. Try to see identification as an obstruction to clear observations. Do you notice that what you identify with has strong emotions attached to the identification? Question those emotions. What are they? What is their statement? Where do they come from? Name the source. Make them account for their identification. What do they say? Examine the emotional center for awareness that may be present and can inform you. Don't trust negative emotions. If you write down over a period your eyes that complain, you will notice that you have the same complaint. Let's say in regards to one person, and you notice later that you have the same complaint about an entirely different person. This is an indication that the complaint is about something in you that you have not observed yet. You have only observed the result of it. It feels like you are in it because you are identified with it. This is what identification feels like. Question. I often feel myself shifting out of work eyes and into the other more common automatic eyes. I identify with them and feel that this is me. This leads me to have an indifferent feeling toward the fewer work eyes. I know that every moment, every reaction, every attitude is an opportunity for self-observation. I feel that there are many opportunities to observe myself and that they are missed due to identification. If I feel that if I am the eyes, then I cannot observe them. Response. This identification with yourself is false. What is habitual and mechanical feels natural. It is natural to the psychological functioning of man asleep. This man asleep is kept asleep through identifying with himself and therefore remains at a level that is actually sub-animal and unreachable by anything above it. The momentum of talking will reinforce identifications. It will also keep you from accurate self-observation. In the beginning, observing I identifies with everything. If you find it in identification with the work, this is a good thing. It is when you begin to see and feel that you are not one I that you will discover that you can choose which I is real. Question. Is not identification and imagination also wrong work of emotional center? And would one student be more likely to fall into imagination rather than identification? So in this way, a student could be typed as to a chief at fault. Response. Inner considering is a form of identification, and imagination always overlaps identification. One student may be more vulnerable to one kind of wrong work over another, but the bottom line is that it is wrong work and must be eliminated. Revenge is an extreme form of account making which belongs to inner considering, which belongs to identification. This long stream of wrong work that begins with negativity created by inner considering can lead all the way to violence. Question. Would it be right work of centers to proceed to do what is necessary in a practical sense, without investing the situation with emotion? Response. It would be the right work to do what is necessary without identification. Identification is hyper-emotion. Wrong work atrophies under the influence of the light of self-observation and through the denial of identification with it. Other elements come into play, like the thought selection and inner separation, but a good deal of power exists in the light of observing I. Question. I think our experience in life comes from what we identify with. Response. It's more like what we identify with creates our experience of life. That you are able to observe and even prevent the expression of old negative I's is an accomplishment, even if you are inconsistent at it. But you have said it yourself. These very strong identifications are convinced that they are right and are firmly entrenched. That is the definition of identification. It is consequently understandable that when you usurp an entrenched characteristic, it leaves a vacuum, and something that you felt very attached to disappears, leaving you with that feeling of no bearings. If you continue to practice as you have been, you will get to a point where you feel so free from the old identifications and pictures and imagination about yourself that there will be no false personality to quibble with. You can be, and if you continue earnestly as you have been, you will be free of all the wrong work that stands between where you are now and your full potential. Your experience is random. It comes to you from outside of you and inside of you without purpose or direction. All kinds of experiences pass through your life, and one places the blame on external circumstances for these experiences. It is what you identify with that creates what you feel is your experience. Your identification with accidental associations is what attracts and holds your attention and makes you feel that your life is the result of identification, when in fact it is what you identify with among many experiences that come to you which forms the content of your life. Identification is not a barrier to observing eye. Question. It is the same old recurrence going round and round and going nowhere. Response. All of these songs are identification with yourself. And, as you know, identification stops you dead in your tracks in the work. They do go nowhere, but they use most of your energy getting there. Question. What is it that does not identify? Response. Real I. This is above the level of identification. Non-identification should not hurt, just the opposite, it should heal. Why you can't separate from a negative emotion, it needs more scrutiny. Try to discern what the eyes of identification are saying and determine whether they are true. If this escapes you at the time, practice inner silence in relation to your identification. Do not listen to its eyes. Do not speak to them. Do not acknowledge them. Reflection will inform you later about what the identification was. False personality's strongest weapon is identification. Fight it with detachment. If you want to diffuse old accounts, begin with trying to see within yourself what identifications initiated the account. In a general sense, the way to do this is to put yourself in the other person's place. See from their point of view, sleep, how you seem to them, and what their life experience has created in them. Remember that everyone has many eyes, and try and separate the offensive eyes from the other things you know about this person. Remember that you are offended where you are most identified, and that the source of the inner account is within you, your requirements. Question. What would other forms of identification be called? Response. Negativity, feelings of superiority, having pictures and imaginations about yourself, holding accounts against others, fear, greed, and all other wrong work of features. Vanity is especially identified. Question. Imagination is separate from identification, yes? Response. Yes. These are two different functions, but imagination is present in identification and vice versa. Teachings of inner transformation. Personality. A person developed in the work to the degree that they are relatively free from the power of false personality can interact with life and people with a clearer perspective on reality. The obstructions of inner considering, mechanical momentum, features and identification lose power as true personality evolves. Not reacting from personality, negativity, identification is key to moving forward. You must be willing to be patient and to make humble efforts. Results will come. Moments of sudden illumination will occur. Question: would attitude be associated with consciousness? Response: no. Attitudes are acquired personality traits. They are never conscious. Question: as one's consciousness expands, would there be a change in one's attitude? Response: of course. As your consciousness expands, your perspective expands. Your understanding deepens and your knowledge grows. Your being develops, and almost every attitude you now have ceases to exist in the light of consciousness. The work creates this kind of change, sometimes in a moment, more often with long intentional work. Be sure that any change in attitude remains consistent with the work, and the change will become permanent. If you are working from false personality, you will feel satisfaction. If you are really doing the work, you will feel humility. False personality is tenacious and will resist, kicking and screaming all the way to oblivion. It is very cunning and it will protect its interests. You can challenge, if you're unsure, any I in order to discover its authenticity. Does the I that you observe present what is real in you? If you ask yourself the question, when you have this doubt, the answer will be clear to you. Question: I was at an oppressive seminar today and took Colin to read. There was a passage on the extinction of personality which jumped out at me. I realized the enormity of what was being said. This is not a grafting of some interesting ideas onto a false personality, but a complete extinction. Now, this is a very frightening thing, and I think it may reflect where I am right now, an enormous struggle that is profound in its implications, and it does make me afraid. Response: recognize that not everything that belongs to personality is trash to be discarded. Surely you have experienced sincere compassion or real forgiveness. The reason self-observation needs to be uncritical, which means not identified with what it observes, is so you can see everything objectively. It is only from that perspective that you can discern true and valuable from false and worthless. Last week, I gave you an illustration of how you can eventually turn a negative activity into something positive and create without dismissing the activity. This kind of adjusting to the right attitude is as much a part of reconstructing as discarding is. The work asks you to know thyself. Then you can choose to become. But first comes knowing everything that is in you from a point of view that can make valuable judgments and has the workforce of the work to carry them out. Does your fear relate to not knowing what happens after the extinction of personality? Or is it being in that space where false personality has perished before true personality has formed? Acting may be necessary at times for some, in which case it should be intentional and as true to authentic being and as objective conscience as you can get. Other than these should be rare occasions. The work asks you to make that false personality passive wherever you can. If you give yourself permission to be asleep in it, so that it can function effectively, you are not on the right track. The work requires of you that you eliminate bit by bit the false personality that you observe. If you find yourself in awkward stages, reflect upon the value this work has for you and continue it in silence. It is essential that you work to be rid of the wrong work, not just observe it. As we have all verified, it is impossible at first not to feel revulsion with one's false personality. This is where the work becomes very subtle. It is also a paradox. One must observe, discern, and separate from all forms of wrong work, which consists of negativity. The feeling of revulsion in relation to what is false and impure in you has relative validity and can contribute to the force you seek for change. This revulsion, however, once again, is the wrong work of the emotional center. Revulsion is also a negative emotion. The work will proceed with more alacrity if inner separation and non-identification take the place of revulsion. This approach to dealing with seeing false personality will contribute to a permanent change. Ouspensky said to Nicole,
"Why are you sad?"
Nicole said,
"I didn't realize I was."
Ouspensky said,
"Is it a habit with you?"
recognize that disgruntledness has unmet requirements. Recognize habitual emotional states. It is correct that you cannot be false personality when you are in it. You can, however, still observe it. When you do, make it quiet. The silence is the space where observing can happen. The power to stop false personality grows there. A slight amendment, making false personality quiet, involves the effort of stopping its manifestations. Whether this is successful or not, a degree of inner quiet is a choice I believe you can make now. Question. I can sometimes curtail outer manifestations of false personality, but I can still feel it inwardly. Is there a difference, from a work point of view, between inner manifestations of false personality and external expressions? What is the specific quality of making personality passive? Response. Yes, there is a difference between inner and outer expressions of false personality, but the work teaches you to observe and separate from both. It is the quality of detachment that defines making personality passive. It is the exercise of not responding to any I that comes from false personality, having no emotional response to it. Question. I have observed many times over that observing makes me more quiet, but I have also noticed of late an inability to ease up on myself a bit and actually enjoy myself. Response. This is good to hear. Talking is often just the automatic expression of false personality. Observing it makes you want to be more quiet, less noise from false personality. This gives you the opportunity to be more real. Question. True personality requires me to talk a bit, yes? Response. Yes. True personality talks quite easily without even considering, but it doesn't require you to talk. Life does. Question. This is connected with the distinction between the active me, whose eyes are in operation with the psychological absorption attending them, and the observing I that must passively and helplessly watch on. I have made some efforts along these lines, and I have found that it is useful in some cases to allow the eyes to continue expressing themselves and elicit observing I in a passive mode. even having a helpless feeling with it. Notice, express the I and watch. The immediate urge to somehow change the I seems to me to be false personality's attempt to clean up what you are observing. This way, false personality thinks it has improved matters, and one can now stop observing because everything is better now. This can muddy real observation. Response. This is a subtle and important perception. It is very common to find false personality trying to imitate what it believes is a work personality for anyone's benefit, including your own. Real I seeks to exert control over personality in order to be authentic, in order to replace wrong work with right work. As false personality is observed and studied and worked against, it loses power, refuses to function, and eventually dissolves. Vanishes to be replaced by your true self, awakened, intentional, internally free, authentic, unique, purified of the labyrinth of wrong work, self-interest, and the negative emotions connected to them. Real I is connected to higher consciousness, objective conscience. It has perfect integrity and contains the meaning and fulfillment of your existence. Observe how personality doesn't want to change, doesn't want to make efforts, especially ones that eliminate its existence. So this is a part of necessary suffering, that is, sacrificing false personality, which is always painful in some way in order to gain real self that is more truly you and in which there is no pretense. Work eyes oppose what you have always known as yourself, but they come from you, they are in you, and even dormant, they are more you than any imitation or pretense. The aim in the work is to change. Is this your aim? Then you must change your cherished sense of yourself. If you want to do the work, then you must continue to practice. Be passive to the resistance of false personality. Expect it and just observe. Once false personality has been observed, it ceases to function smoothly or at all. Sometimes we are left without the faculties to interact with the world. This state is part of the evolution in the work, and it can feel like psychological vertigo, but it is temporary. You are describing the experience of feeling the loss of your personality. It feels like psychological vertigo. That sense of panic comes from not knowing who you are without your personality. You will notice that the frightening feeling vanished once you were again firmly entrenched in personality through your exchange with the colleague. These experiences reveal that there is nothing behind false personality, nothing to stand on. Your house is built on sand, and nothing authentic has been created to replace it yet, true personality. This is a common experience in the early stages of work practice. It comes from shining the light of consciousness on personality. Uspensky himself had the following experience early in his practice of the fourth way. In a letter to a friend, he stated that he did not know who would be writing the next letter, which I, and this frightened him. Seeing our multiplicity and disconnecting with our former sense of self is very unsettling, but we need to realize that I am not that, and that this is a temporary transition. We are hearing from some of you about the psychological vertigo accompanying this process, which begins with the deconstruction of our false personality. This vertigo is being expressed in a sense of panic, a feeling of emptiness, a feeling of fear or anxiety, or sometimes the sense of being a fraud. The best way to deal with it is to try to practice inner separation in relation to those feelings and realize that it is a natural, temporary response in the process of the work. The way to eliminate that negative experience is by building something real internally, which will act consciously in the world. The way to build that in you begins with and relies upon self-observation. When the mind is filled with the constant babble of inner considering and the heart is motivated by the self-interest of inner considering, the potential of receptivity to a higher state is lost. That is why all practical work is focused on self-change or self-transcendence. The possibility of intentional psychological self-generated evolution lies in this process of purification. This means it is self-observation. Remember that the aim of the work is psycho-transformation. There are many positive elements that can exist in false personality. They are, however, still mechanical, still asleep, and though they may be more pleasant to deal with, they are no less false than any other aspect of acquired personality. They can work against you and your aims to develop in very, very insidious ways. Someone who is mechanically positive with a pleasant personality will have a harder time finding a reason to change or see anything wrong with their behavior in the first place. They will lack the motivation to change. When false personality eyes try to observe themselves, they are enamored with what they see. This confused state, although powerful, is temporary and a common experience in the beginning of the work. The uncertainty, the loss of identity, and the terror that these feelings create is the psychological vertigo that accompanies the state of recognizing false personality with an undeveloped observing eye. There are many opportunities to see false personality, vanity, or pride, and everything else the work tells us to observe in everyone's everyday experience that is nearly impossible to not notice them functioning if you are observing. To use an example, perhaps you are a rather witty fellow, intelligent, perceptive, with a keen sense of humour, perhaps a jovial blood type. In almost every social situation, you have the wittiest remarks. You can top anyone's story. You can level your friends with one witty word, and you enjoy this about yourself. Your friends enjoy it too. You perceive yourself to be a good-natured, humorous person. This funny guy is the false personality, but you cannot see it when you are only being it. Everything about the false personality emanates from self-serving motives. Inner considering, which makes up most of the false personality, is obsessed with, what do others think of me? Do they see me? Can they tell that I'm special? Am I being treated properly? Have I been insulted? Have I received the merit and recognition I deserve? Am I attractive enough? Am I clothed right? Am I making the impression I wish to project? Do I have what I want? Do I have approval, acceptance? Am I being foolish? All of these thoughts and emotions belong to a false personality. One can see vanity in them. One can see pride. One can see insincerity and dishonesty, and eventually one can see the complete mechanicalness of it all. When one verifies what one knows to be the truth of the work regarding oneself, the recognition creates a separation, some space for non-identification. Observing and verifying mechanics creates a powerful force that doesn't want to be mechanical. If that force is strong enough, it can create permanent change. More often, force will be accumulated over a long period of observing the same eyes, behaving the same way, regardless of observation. Any self-justification in this process should be considered a red light that inner considering is at work, and you must not listen to it. So back to our witty fellow. Suppose he's trying to work on himself, and so he has an aim to make his personality passive. What does that mean? It means that he chooses not to go along with his mechanical reactions in life. Perhaps the next time he is with a group of people, talking, laughing, with personality flowing abundantly, he will recognize his desire to make a funny remark as arising from the need to have attention, to be appreciated, and recognized as the wonderful fellow that he is. His work effort then would be to remain silent, and in doing so for the first time, much that he has missed can become clear. Because he is not projecting his personality, he can be perceiving reality in a different way. He may see some poor other mechanical person caught in the momentum that he was able to resist. He may feel fear or pain where he never would have noticed before because his attention was consumed with himself. He may recognize that his contribution, had he made it, was basically irrelevant and had no other purpose other than to gratify his vanity. And if he can see this one little piece, then perhaps he can begin to realize that it is the same with all other little pieces. Consequently, his real importance in the world has nothing to do with whatever his personality has to offer it, but what he has to offer the world without his personality in the way. Right. 46 minutes in, we are going to wrap it up again. I am still really enjoying this. I really hope that you are all getting as much from this as I am. I almost want to, because there are no decent schools available, I think I almost want to start a school. I'm certainly going to find some of Maurice Nicole's work, and Ouspensky as well. So all videos for the future, all audio, video, whatever for the future. So thank you very much for being here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'll see you again tomorrow.